My daughter stepped out of her car, and within seconds, a man had a gun in her face. But what he didn't know? She's not just any woman, she's the FBI's tactical commander. And what happened next? You won't believe it. The setup. Freeze. In the suburbs. An attention-grabbing, emotionally charged opening to pull viewers in fast. It happened faster than I could process. One moment, our neighborhood was exactly as it always is on a Saturday morning. Quiet. Relaxed, safe. The sun was out, casting soft golden light over trimmed hedges and picket fences. Kids were playing a few houses down. Sprinklers clicked rhythmically. It was picture perfect. And then, freeze! A voice cut through the calm like a bullet, sharp, loud, aggressive. It echoed off the walls of the houses, stopping birds mid-flight and conversations mid-sentence. And when I looked up, the sight froze me to my seat. There he was, Greg. Our neighborhood's self-proclaimed HOA security officer. Tall, heavy-set, and wearing that ridiculous black vest with community enforcement, printed across it like he was on a SWAT team. He had a walkie-talkie clipped to his shoulder, a cheap tactical belt strapped around his waist, and in his hands, a gun, a real loaded handgun, pointed at my daughter. Emma had just arrived minutes earlier. She was still stepping away from her car, smiling, probably ready to hand me a cup of coffee and tell me about her crazy overnight shift. She looked casual, jeans, sneakers, hoodie, hair tied back. You wouldn't think anything of her if you passed her on the sidewalk. But apparently to Greg, that was suspicious enough to go full Rambo. "Step away from the vehicle," he barked. She paused, slowly turned. I could see her hands go up, calm, measured, controlled. She didn't panic. She didn't scream. But I could feel it. Something serious was about to go down. At first, I honestly thought this had to be some bizarre prank, some staged scene for a hidden camera show or social experiment. But when I saw Greg's finger hovering near the trigger, saw the fear in my neighbor's eyes as they peeked out from behind curtains, I knew this wasn't a joke. This man truly believed he was protecting the neighborhood from my daughter. The daughter who was raised in this very house. What he didn't realize, what no one on that street knew except me, was that my daughter isn't just some out-of-town visitor. She's a federal agent, a tactical commander with the FBI. She leads armed entry teams into cartel compounds. She negotiates with hostage takers. She trains with the best of the best. And now she was being held at gunpoint by a wannabe vigilante with a badge he likely printed off the internet. He had no idea what was about to unfold. And honestly, neither did I. The calm before the storm. A peaceful scene shattered in a heartbeat. It was one of those perfect mornings where everything feels still. The kind where the air is crisp, the sky is cloudless, and the world feels like it's finally giving you a break. Our neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet. The only sounds were the soft hiss of sprinklers, watering freshly trimmed lawns, and the distant hum of someone mowing a backyard. Birds chirped in trees that lined the sidewalks, and kids' bicycles leaned lazily against garage walls. It was the kind of morning where you don't expect anything to happen, much less something dangerous. I sat on my front porch like I always do on weekends, enjoying my usual black coffee. No phone, no laptop, just me, the breeze, and a little peace. Then I saw her. My daughter Emma pulled up in her dark SUV, parking right in front of the house. She had just come off another long shift, 12 hours or more, no doubt. She looked tired, but still had that composed energy about her. She stepped out of the car, stretched her arms above her head, and gave me a small wave as she made her way toward the porch. She was dressed like any other young woman, worn jeans, a black hoodie, hair tied back. She didn't wear her badge, didn't flash anything. She didn't need to. She was just coming home. To Greg, though, she must have looked suspicious. He didn't see Emma, the calm, collected FBI commander who's tackled cartel, safe houses, and handled federal manhunts. He just saw a woman he didn't recognize, parking a car with out-of-state plates, and that apparently was enough to put him on high alert. As I stood up to greet her, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, fast, focused, and aggressive. Greg, marching across his lawn, like he'd spotted a threat in a war zone. I honestly thought he might just yell at her for parking rules or try to be his usual self-righteous self. But then I saw the gun, drawn, pointed, hands shaking. Everything inside me froze. My mind raced. Was this really happening? Right now? Right here? In our peaceful, safe neighborhood? Emma stopped walking. She didn't look scared. She didn't even flinch. She was trained for this. Her calmness was surreal. But my heart felt like it had just been dropped off a building. Greg shouted again. I couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The calm was gone. The storm had just begun. The HOA hero arrives. A neighborhood watchdog crosses the line, dangerously. From across the street came the thunder of heavy footsteps, fast, determined and reckless. It was Greg, our self-proclaimed HOA security officer. Everyone in the neighborhood knew him. He took it upon himself to patrol the cul-de-sac, like he was protecting a nuclear facility. He wasn't elected. He wasn't asked. He just showed up one day wearing a vest with community enforcement stitched across the chest in bold white letters, like that made him official. He had no badge, no training, no legal authority. But what he did have was a loaded weapon. And today, that weapon was pointed directly at my daughter. Greg stormed toward Emma's SUV with all the fake confidence of a wannabe cop. His hand was already reaching for the firearm strapped to his side as he yelled, "Step away from the vehicle." His voice echoed down the block, loud and threatening. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a command, one he had no right to give. He didn't know who Emma was, didn't ask questions, didn't check with anyone. He saw a young woman stepping out of an SUV with out-of-state plates, and in his mind, that was reason enough to pull a gun and start shouting orders, like he was at a checkpoint in a war zone. Emma froze, calm but alert. She raised her hands slowly, a move I'd seen her do in training videos. Her stance changed subtly, shifting her weight to one leg, keeping her posture open but ready. She was reading him like a textbook. The way his grip trembled, the way his voice cracked. He was scared but trying to act powerful. That's the most dangerous combination. Greg, on the other hand, was completely unaware of the storm he'd just stepped into. He didn't see a threat. He saw an opportunity to play the hero. Neighbors began peeking through curtains. A couple stepped outside with their phones, filming from a distance. The street was suddenly dead quiet except for Greg's voice. I said back away from the vehicle. This neighborhood has rules. No unauthorized parking. No unregistered visitors. You don't belong here. Emma stayed still, hands still up. Her eyes never left him. I stood frozen on the porch, heart pounding, unsure if I should scream, call the cops, or both. What Greg didn't know was this. He wasn't facing a lost tourist or a criminal. He was facing an elite federal agent who had taken down real threats across the country. Was him. And the only person in danger right now, the neighborhood freezes. A street full of silence, phones, and fear. Time stopped. In that moment, the street fell into a dead silence. You could hear the buzz of a single mosquito if you tried. Everything stood still. The sprinkler systems kept ticking mindlessly, watering already soaked lawns. Somewhere a dog barked once and went quiet, as if even it could sense something was off. From behind curtains and blinds, faces started appearing, nervous eyes peeking out. A few people opened their front doors just enough to look out, phones in hand, already recording. Maybe they thought it was some kind of scene from a cop show. Maybe they just didn't want to miss something viral. But this wasn't entertainment. This wasn't a prank or a neighborhood argument. This was a man with a gun pointed at my daughter. And she didn't even blink. Emma stood still, hands calmly raised to shoulder level. Her fingers were open, palms visible, classic de-escalation stance. Her face was composed, no panic, no fear. She knew exactly what to do. Sir, put the weapon down, she said evenly. Her voice didn't crack. It didn't rise. It cut through the air like a razor. She didn't scream. She didn't plead. She commanded. But Greg, he wasn't interested in reason. His chest puffed up even more and his voice got louder, as if volume could make up for his insecurity. You don't belong here, he shouted. HOA rules. No overnight parking. This neighborhood doesn't allow strangers. You're breaking code. I stood frozen on the porch, fists clenched. I wanted to yell, to intervene, but I knew better. Any sudden move could make Greg twitch, and one wrong twitch could pull that trigger. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it might echo down the street. What made it all worse? Greg didn't even know how wrong he was. He didn't know Emma wasn't a stranger. He didn't know she wasn't some lost visitor. He didn't know she was raised in this neighborhood. She rode bikes down these sidewalks, played tag with the same kids now watching from doorways. Her roots were deeper than his clipboard and vest could ever reach. But all Greg saw was someone unfamiliar. And in his tiny world of rules and paranoia, unfamiliar meant dangerous. And so there he stood, hands shaking, gun raised, holding an FBI tactical commander at gunpoint in the very neighborhood she once called home. The street was frozen, but things were about to erupt. She was trained for this. The difference between ego and real authority. What Greg didn't realize, what he couldn't have known, was that Emma wasn't just some girl in a hoodie visiting her dad. She wasn't a stranger. She wasn't lost. She wasn't a threat. She was the most qualified person on that street to handle exactly the kind of situation Greg was about to create. Emma is a tactical commander for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. She spent years training in high-stress, high-risk environments. She's led teams into cartel compounds, served federal warrants on violent criminals, negotiated hostage situations, and dismantled trafficking rings. She's been in rooms where one wrong move meant someone didn't go home. And yet, if you saw her on the street, you'd never guess. She doesn't carry herself like someone who craves attention. She's not loud, not flashy. She doesn't use her badge unless there's a very specific reason. But this was that reason? With a gun pointed at her chest, and a man growing more unstable by the second, Emma knew it was time to take control. Slowly, so slowly, you could miss it. She moved her left hand toward the edge of her jacket. The kind of movement that, in tactical training, is drilled 1,000 times to avoid setting off a jumpy gunman. But Greg wasn't trained. He didn't understand movement. He only understood fear. "Don't move!" he shouted, voice cracking, finger tightening on the trigger. My breath caught in my throat. One wrong move and he'd fire. But Emma? She didn't flinch. She didn't stop. She didn't speed up either. With the calm of someone who's done this hundreds of times, she reached inside her jacket and pulled out her badge, the official gold and blue Federal. Credentials that speak louder than any words ever could. She held it out in front of her, arms steady. "Special Agent Emma Collins," she said, clear and commanding. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Tactical Command." It was like the street itself exhaled. Even the neighbors gasped. Phones zoomed in. People who were whispering behind hedges went silent. Greg's posture faltered. His arm dipped just slightly. Confusion settling into his face. He didn't know what to say. He was standing there, weapon raised, and suddenly realized he might have just made the worst mistake of his life, because the woman he thought was a threat was actually the most dangerous person to a threat, and she was now looking at him. The reveal. The moment the truth came out, and power flipped instantly. "Special Agent Emma Collins, FBI Tactical Command." Her voice rang out sharp and crisp, like a gavel slamming in a courtroom. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Authority isn't about volume, it's about presence. And the second she said those words, the atmosphere shifted. Emma took a half step to the side, subtly widening her stance. Her shoulders squared. Her chin lifted slightly. It was a transformation you could feel more than see. She wasn't just a visitor anymore. She was in command. That's when the gasps started. From behind windows, from porches, from the people filming on their phones, everyone realized what was happening. This wasn't a simple parking dispute. This wasn't some neighborhood misunderstanding. They were watching a federal agent get threatened by a man who thought an embroidered vest gave him power. Greg froze, his outstretched arms suddenly unsure, his face caught between panic and disbelief. You could almost see his mind trying to catch up. He wanted control. He wanted to be the hero, but now he was staring down, someone who outranked every ounce of authority he thought he had. For a few heartbeats, he didn't say a word. Then, in a voice that cracked with defensiveness, he snapped, "She's lying!" Anyone can print a badge. And just like that, he made his second and biggest mistake. Because at that point, denying the obvious wasn't just ignorant, it was dangerous. Emma didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She didn't need to. She let the badge do the talking. The gold shimmered in the morning sun. Her FBI ID was clearly visible, government sealed, laminated and 100% authentic. And if anyone still had doubts, her calm, trained body language erased them. You don't fake that kind of composure. You don't fake federal posture. You definitely don't fake the kind of silence that makes everyone else realize they've been watching a delusional man challenge the wrong person. One of the neighbors muttered, "Oh my God. She's real," as if only just putting the pieces together. Greg's eyes darted left and right. He knew he'd lost the crowd. His face flushed red, his mouth twitched, but he still held on to that last shred of imaginary control. He didn't know that reality was about to hit him in full force. Because while he stood frozen in his fantasy of power, the real law was already on its way. Backup arrives. Respect meets reality, and the real law shows up. Just when it felt like the situation couldn't get any more tense, a sudden flash of red and blue lights broke through the stillness. 2 squad cars came flying down the street. No sirens, just lights, quiet but fast. The kind of response that means one thing: potential gunfire. Unbeknownst to Greg, multiple neighbors had already called. Some whispered from behind hedges, others filmed while dialing. They didn't know what was happening, but they knew enough to understand. A man was pointing a gun at someone, in broad daylight. And it wasn't a cop. The cruisers came to a hard stop, tires chirping against the pavement. Doors flew open. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, weapons drawn, scanning quickly, fingers ready. You could feel the shift in energy, the silence that says everyone's on edge and anything could happen. But as soon as their eyes landed on Emma, everything changed. She stood with her badge held high in her left hand, calm and unshaken. "Special Agent Emma Collins, FBI Tactical Command," she said again, voice loud and clear, identifying herself professionally. The lead officer lowered his weapon slightly and gave a sharp nod of recognition. The other followed suit. That's all it took. No questions. No hesitation. They knew who was in charge now. "Agent Collins," the officer said with respect, "we've got it from here." Emma gave a small nod and slowly backed away, allowing the officers to take control of the scene. It was the smooth, quiet coordination that only happens when professionals speak the same unspoken language. Then the attention shifted. Straight to Greg. His arms, once puffed with false authority, hung limp at his sides. His face had turned pale, ashen. Sweat glistened on his forehead. Reality had finally caught up to him. "Sir," the lead officer commanded, "place the weapon on the ground. Now!" Greg hesitated, just for a second, but that second said everything. He was no longer in control. He wasn't leading anything. He was just another man who made a very bad decision. With trembling fingers, he knelt down and gently placed the pistol on the grass. An officer swiftly moved in, securing the weapon, while another read him his rights. And just like that, the self-declared protector of the neighborhood found himself being escorted to the back of a real police cruiser, in front of the very people he once barked at about HOA bylaws. The difference? Emma earned her badge. Greg printed his. Absolutely. Here's the 450 word. Expanded version of Section 8, the fallout, with added detail, emotional weight, and a satisfying sense of justice. The fallout. When the truth surfaces and consequences finally catch up, the situation had shifted completely. Greg, once marching around like a one-man army, was now sitting on the curb, handcuffed, head down, face flushed with embarrassment and disbelief. The crowd that had gathered was no longer curious or concerned. They were angry, disappointed, some even shaking their heads in disbelief. The officers on scene did a thorough job. They ran his ID, checked the weapon, took witness statements, including mine, and the more they uncovered, the worse it got for Greg. Turns out Greg had zero legal authority to do anything he'd been doing. His so-called security role? Completely self-appointed. The HOA had never hired him, never approved armed patrols, and in fact, had previously asked him not to confront people. But he saw himself as the enforcer, above everyone, including the law. His weapon? Not registered for any form of public enforcement use. It was a personal firearm, no license to carry in a law enforcement capacity. No training on how or when to draw it. No de-escalation certification. Nothing. In other words, Greg wasn't a protector. He was a walking liability with a gun and a fantasy. And that fantasy had just put a federal agent's life at risk. The charges? Assault with a deadly weapon, brandishing a firearm in a threatening manner, impersonating a law enforcement officer. All serious, all with consequences that would likely include jail time and a permanent criminal record. As Greg sat there, the irony practically screamed from his lawn. Right in front of his house, there was a hand-painted wooden sign he proudly displayed for months. It read in bold red letters, "You messed with the wrong one." It used to be his warning to others. A boast, a threat. But now, that sign looked more like a punchline, because Greg did mess with the wrong one. He pointed a gun at someone who doesn't just know the law, she enforces it at the highest level. Emma had faced down cartel leaders, violent fugitives, and international threats. And now she could add Greg from the HOA to the list. Neighbors slowly began to speak up, sharing stories about how Greg had intimidated delivery drivers, yelled at teenagers, even followed unfamiliar cars around the block. His security was never about safety. It was about control. But control doesn't last forever. And that day in broad daylight, in front of the whole neighborhood, Greg learned what happens when fake authority meets real justice. A teachable moment. When the uniforms come off, the real lessons begin. Later that evening, the chaos had finally faded. The sirens were gone. The crowd dispersed. The sun had dipped below the rooftops, leaving behind a soft golden twilight. It should have felt peaceful again, but the quiet now carried a different weight. Emma and I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where she once did her homework, talked about her crushes in high school, and celebrated getting into the academy. But tonight she looked different, not in uniform, but heavy with thought. She wrapped both hands around her mug of tea, staring into the steam. "Dad," she finally said, voice low but steady, "he could have shot me." Over a license plate. There was no anger in her tone, no bitterness, just the calm of someone used to processing danger, but this time it was personal. This time it happened in her own backyard, and it could have ended very differently. I nodded slowly, unsure what to say. I was still shaken myself, still picturing Greg's trembling hands on that weapon, still hearing the sharpness of his voice, still thinking of what could have happened had she not stayed so incredibly composed. Emma leaned back in her chair and sighed. "It's not just about him," she continued. "It's about this mindset where people think authority comes from a vest and a loud voice, where nobody checks their behavior because they talk tough or, quote, rules. That's not safety. That's fear wearing a badge it didn't earn." She was right. Greg wasn't the problem. He was the symptom. The symptom of a community that let one man walk around pretending to be in charge, because it was easier to ignore it than confront it. But that changed that day. The next HOA meeting, normally empty and dry, was packed wall to wall. Concerned residents showed up, and real conversations started. People who'd stayed silent finally spoke. Stories surfaced about Greg confronting babysitters, tailing Uber drivers, even harassing teenagers with paintball guns. Everyone realized they had looked the other way too long. The board dissolved Greg's community enforcement program entirely. In its place, a new neighborhood watch. No weapons, no vests, just trained volunteers with radios, reflective vests, and actual coordination with local police. Emma even helped guide the first training session. Because real protection doesn't come from intimidation. It comes from preparation, communication, and mutual respect. And that night, as we sat in that kitchen, I realized something. My daughter wasn't just a hero with a badge. She was a leader, even without the uniform. Final message to the audience. A dramatic standoff with a deeper lesson. This story might sound like something out of a TV drama, but it really happened on an ordinary street, in an ordinary neighborhood with very real consequences. And it should leave you asking a very real question. What does authority actually look like? Because the truth is, authority isn't about a vest, a gun, or yelling the loudest. It's not about walking around with a clipboard, threatening people over minor rule violations. It's not about ego, power trips, or fear. Real authority is quiet. It's trained. It's tested. And it's earned. Emma didn't need to shout to take control. She didn't need to threaten to gain respect.
She didn't even need to reveal who she was, until she had no other choice.
She stayed calm while a gun was pointed at her chest. She stayed professional while being accused of not belonging. She could have overpowered Greg in seconds, but instead she showed restraint, patience, maturity. Because that's what real power looks like. Greg, on the other hand, saw himself as a hero. But what did he really protect that day? Did he make anyone feel safer? Or did he put the entire neighborhood at risk because of his pride and paranoia? This wasn't just about one man overstepping boundaries. It was about how unchecked ego, combined with ignorance and false authority, can lead to dangerous situations. And let this be a reminder, you never know who someone really is. That quiet woman in the hoodie? She wasn't a threat to the community. She was the person trained to protect it. So the next time you see someone playing the hero, trying to control others under the mask of rules or security, ask yourself, are they really protecting anyone? Or are they just protecting their own pride? This story isn't just about drama. It's about accountability. It's about community. It's about remembering that authority without wisdom is dangerous. and that real heroes don't seek attention, they seek justice. If this story made you think, if it made you feel something, if it made you see your neighborhood a little differently, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more real-life stories that shine a light on hidden truths. Because sometimes, the biggest lessons come from the quietest people. And sometimes, the hero doesn't wear a cape. She just wears a hoodie.